The morning news broadcast came through every screen on Earth at exactly the same time. Park Min-seok was sitting in the military barracks cafeteria, drinking cold coffee and looking at nothing in particular when the announcement started. The United Nations Council had received an official message from the Ethereal Federation, an ancient alien civilization that had been watching humanity for many decades. The Ethereals looked like beings made of light and crystal. They spoke in calm, smooth voices. Their words were careful and measured. The lead speaker, who identified herself as Ambassador Lyris, stood before the global camera with no expression on her face. She explained that her people had completed their study of the human species. They had watched how humans lived, how they worked, how they treated each other, and how they treated other species on their own world. After 70 years of careful research, the Ethereals had reached a final conclusion about humanity. Humans, the Ethereals said, were fundamentally violent. This violence was not something humans did by choice in certain situations. Instead, violence was woven into the very nature of human beings. Throughout human history, the Ethereals had observed countless wars. They had seen humans hurt each other for money, for land, for power, and for belief. Humans had created weapons of terrible power. They had used these weapons against each other again and again. Even in times of peace, humans remained dangerous. They still fought in smaller ways. They attacked each other in streets and homes. They bullied those who were different. They damaged their own world and killed other creatures just to take what they wanted. Because of these facts, the Ethereals announced their decision. Humanity could not be allowed to join the galactic community. Humans could not be trusted with the technology or knowledge that existed among the stars. Humans would be restricted to their own solar system. They would not be given access to space travel technology beyond a certain level. They would not be invited to trade with other worlds. They would remain separated from the rest of the galaxy until, or unless, they could prove they were capable of something better than violence. The Ethereals were not attacking humans. They were not threatening to destroy Earth. They were simply protecting the galaxy from a species that could not control its own nature. The decision was not made in anger or fear. It was made with scientific certainty. It was made the way someone might decide not to give fire to a child who did not understand how to use it safely. When the broadcast ended, there was silence in the cafeteria. Then slowly, soldiers and officers began talking. Some were angry, some looked shocked, some nodded as if they had always known this might happen. Park Min-seok did not move. He sat with his cold coffee and felt something shift inside his chest, something he could not quite name. Min-seok was 35 years old. He had been a Marine for 17 years. He had served in conflicts across 3 continents. He had seen things that changed him permanently. He had watched friends die. He had held their hands as they left this world. He had also done things he would never be able to fully explain to people who had not been where he was. He had made choices in moments when there was only time to act, not time to think. He had killed people. He had done it to protect others. He had done it because his orders told him to. He had done it because in those moments, with bullets flying around him, it was either them or his friends. It was either them or him. But when he was not in combat, Min-seok was quiet. He was thoughtful. He spent time at a small coffee shop near the base where an old woman made traditional Korean food. He read books about philosophy and history. He visited hospitals to spend time with injured soldiers, many of them younger than himself. He had never married, but he had friends who loved him, and he loved them back in the way men like him could love without speaking about it directly. Min-seok's reflection stared back at him from the dark surface of his cold coffee. The Ethereals were right, he thought. They had observed the facts correctly. Humans were violent. He himself was proof of this. He had violence inside him. It was always there below the surface, like a dark pool beneath ice. It did not matter how much coffee he drank or how many books he read. The violence remained. It was part of who he was. Maybe the aliens understood something that humans did not understand about themselves. Maybe humans really were too dangerous to be trusted with the stars. In another part of the world, in a research facility built into a mountain in South Korea, Dr. Kang Ji-woo was also watching the broadcast. She was a xenobiologist, which meant she studied life from other worlds and other species. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for the possibility of contact with alien civilization. She had written papers about how to communicate with unknown beings. She had theorized about what values other species might have. She had argued that humans were capable of being more than their worst moments. Now, watching Ambassador Lyris deliver her conclusion about humanity, Ji-woo felt something break inside her chest. The words were like physical blows. Everything she had believed in, everything she had worked for, everything she had hoped for humanity's future in the galaxy, felt suddenly fragile and foolish. The ethereals had looked at humanity and seen only violence. They had not seen the doctors who spent their lives trying to heal others. They had not seen the teachers who gave their lives to education and the future. They had not seen the artists and poets who created beauty. They had not seen the ordinary people who did small, kind things for strangers every single day without needing to be thanked or remembered. Ji-woo stood up from her desk and walked to the window. Below her, the world continued. People walked in the streets. Children played. Families had dinners together. People laughed and cried and loved each other. The ethereals said these people were violent and dangerous. But Ji-woo knew better. She knew the complexity that lived inside every human heart. She knew that humans were not simple creatures. They were not made of one thing alone. They contained multitudes. In that moment, watching the world continue beneath her window, Ji-woo made a decision. She would prove the ethereals wrong. She would gather evidence about human goodness. She would show that humans were more than the ethereals' conclusions. She would fight back against this judgment in the only way she knew how, with data and research and the truth of what humans really were. She picked up her phone and began making calls. She had work to do, and the future of her entire species depended on her doing it well. 2 weeks after the ethereals' announcement, 5 alien beings arrived at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva. They came in a small ship that landed in a secured area where no humans could get close enough to touch it or cause any trouble. The ship was beautiful in a strange way, made of materials that seemed to be both solid and glowing at the same time. When the ethereals stepped out, everyone who saw them felt small. Ambassador Lyris was the leader of this delegation. She was tall and graceful, and her body seemed to be made of light contained inside a form that looked almost human. Her skin was pale blue, and her eyes were large and ancient. Around her moved 4 other ethereals, each one carrying instruments and equipment for observation. They had come to Earth not to negotiate, but to document humanity's failures and finalize the restrictions on human expansion into space. The governments of Earth had no choice but to cooperate. Humanity's future depended on dealing with these visitors carefully. The United Nations quickly assembled a team of humans who would work with the ethereals. This team would show them the best of human civilization. They would try to change the aliens' minds, or at least prevent things from getting worse. Dr. Kang Ji-woo was selected to be the main human contact with the ethereals. This was both an honor and a terrible burden. She knew that everything she said and did would be analyzed and judged. She spent nights not sleeping, preparing presentations about human achievement. She gathered documents showing human kindness. She prepared videos of humans helping each other, creating art, teaching children, building things together. But she also knew that the ethereals had already decided. They had come here to confirm what they already believed, not to question it. Still, she had to try. She assembled a team around herself. She chose carefully. She picked philosophers who could explain human ethics and morality. She chose artists and musicians who could show human creativity and beauty. She picked doctors and teachers, people who had dedicated their lives to helping others. She made sure to include religious leaders who could speak about human spirituality and compassion. She deliberately did not include any military personnel. She did not want the ethereals to see soldiers or weapons. She did not want them to think about violence at all. In her mind, the best way to prove humans were not violent was to show them humans who had never been violent. This was her mistake, though she did not know it yet. The military high command disagreed with the decision to exclude soldiers. They argued that security had to be the priority. They could not allow the ethereals to move around Earth without military protection. They insisted on assigning a security detail to the delegation. After much discussion, they agreed to a compromise. There would be security personnel present, but they would stay in the background. They would be there only if something went wrong. Captain Park Min-seok was assigned to head this security detail. He received the news through official channels, and his first feeling was one of strange irony. Of all the people in the world, they were assigning him to be around the creatures that had just declared his entire species too violent to join the galaxy. He was the worst possible choice for this job. His hands had blood on them, even though that blood had been spilled for reasons he still believed were right. But Min-seok was a professional soldier. He did not question his orders. He accepted the assignment and prepared himself mentally for the task ahead. He would stay professional. He would remain in the background. He would do his job without letting his personal feelings interfere. The first meeting between the human delegation and the ethereals took place in a large, beautiful hall at the United Nations. Dr. Ji-woo had decorated the space with Earth's best art. She had arranged for a musician to play a traditional Korean instrument, a gaegeum, whose sound was beautiful and complex. She had prepared a meal featuring the best foods from many human cultures. She had tried to show the ethereals a glimpse of what made Earth special. Ambassador Lyris looked at everything with no expression. The artwork was observed but not appreciated. The music was heard but not enjoyed. The food was examined but not tasted. When Ji-woo described how humans had created beautiful things across thousands of years, Lyris responded with a calm statement that cut like ice. "Humans create these things," the ambassador said, "as a way of expressing emotions that eventually lead to conflict. You make art about love, about loss, about struggle. These emotions are the root cause of your violence. You romanticize feelings that should be controlled. This is precisely why humans cannot be trusted with advanced civilization. You let emotion, rather than logic, guide your decisions." Ji-woo tried to argue. She spoke about how art was a way to process emotions peacefully, rather than through violence, but Lyris simply repeated her earlier statement in slightly different words. She was not interested in Ji-woo's arguments. She had already made up her mind. Throughout this first meeting, Min-seok stood quietly in the background, watching everything. He noticed small details. He noticed how the ethereals moved their eyes over human faces without seeming to really see the people wearing those faces. He noticed how they asked questions but did not listen to the answers. He noticed how their conclusion was already written, and they were simply gathering information to support what they already believed. As the days passed and more meetings occurred, this pattern continued. Dr. Ji-woo would present evidence of human goodness. The ethereals would observe it, catalog it, and then explain how it actually proved their point. Humans created medicine, but this was because they fought diseases like soldiers fighting enemies. Humans built cities and cultures, but this was all based on competition with other humans. Humans raised children with love. But this was a tribal instinct that eventually led to conflict between groups. Captain Min-seok watched all of this unfold. He said nothing. He did his job. But in his quiet way, he was learning things about the ethereals. He was learning that they were not evil, but they were certain. They believed they understood humans better than humans understood themselves. They had decided what humanity was, and nothing would change their minds, or so they thought. Min-seok continued to watch. He waited, and somewhere deep inside him, in the place where soldiers develop instincts that go beyond logic, he wondered if perhaps the ethereals had come to Earth expecting to see only one side of the human story. He wondered if they would recognize the other side, even if it showed itself to them clearly. The delegation remained on Earth for several more weeks. Meetings continued, presentations were made, arguments were offered and rejected. And slowly the date approached when the ethereals would deliver their final judgment about humanity's future. The underground research facility was built deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland. It was a place where scientists studied particle physics and tested new technologies in a controlled environment. The facility had been around for decades, and it was supposed to be one of the safest places in the world. Multiple safety systems protected the workers. Multiple backup systems existed for every important function. The building was designed to survive earthquakes and extreme weather. It was designed to last forever. On the 23rd day of the ethereal delegation's stay on Earth, one small failure triggered a chain reaction that nobody had predicted. A coolant pipe in the main reactor system developed a microscopic crack. This crack had always been there, but it had grown slowly, invisibly, over months and years. Nobody had noticed it during inspections because the crack was in a location that was difficult to reach and difficult to see. The crack was so small that it would never have caused a problem if everything else had remained normal. But on that particular morning, someone made a human error. A technician, tired after working a night shift, failed to run one of the standard checks. This failure meant that a pressure reading was not recorded. A warning system that should have alerted people about rising pressure did not send its message. The coolant continued to leak. The pressure continued to rise. The temperature in the reactor chamber began to climb. By the time anyone noticed something was wrong, the problem had already begun. Alarms screamed through the facility. Workers ran toward emergency exits. In the control room, engineers stared at their screens in shock and horror. The reactor was not shutting down properly. The cooling systems were failing. The temperature was rising past safe levels. Within minutes, the situation became critical. A section of the facility began to fail. Metal supports that had stood for decades suddenly buckled under stress. Concrete walls cracked. Dust fell from the ceiling. The entire underground section, the one where the ethereal delegation was being given a tour, began to collapse. 11 people were in the facility at that moment. 6 were human scientists and workers. 2 were members of the ethereal delegation. 3 more were security and administrative staff. Captain Park Min-seok was there as well. He had insisted on being present during the tour, despite Ji-woo's objections. He had trusted his instincts, the ones that told him something might go wrong. He did not know what might go wrong. He only knew that his place was where danger might be. When the first tremor hit, when the first metal beam fell and crashed onto the floor, everything changed in an instant. The ethereals froze. They had never experienced anything like this. Their civilization had advanced past the point where catastrophic accidents happened. They did not understand what was occurring. They did not have training for this kind of emergency. They simply stood there, confused and afraid, as the world fell apart around them. The human workers also froze for a moment, but only for a moment. Then their training and instincts took over. They began moving toward exits, helping each other, working together to escape. But several people were still trapped. The passage to the main exit was now blocked by fallen debris. A young ethereal scientist named Vesh had moved toward a window to look at the underground gardens and was now cut off from the exit. 2 human workers were also trapped on the far side of a newly created wall of rubble. Captain Min-seok did not freeze. In his mind, the situation became clear and simple. There were people who needed help, and there was a soldier who could help them. Everything else fell away. His fear, his doubts, his questions about his own nature and humanity's nature All of it disappeared. What remained was pure function. His body knew what to do because his body had been trained for 17 years to do exactly this kind of thing. He moved first toward the two human workers. He was fast and strong. He helped them over and around the debris. He guided them back toward the exit, supporting their weight with his own body. Around them, the building continued to fail. More dust filled the air. The sound was deafening, like the world was tearing itself apart. Then he saw Vesh, the young ethereal scientist. The alien had fallen when a metal beam had collapsed. The beam now rested on top of the ethereal's lower body, pinning him to the ground. Vesh was making sounds that might have been screams, but the sound was so distorted by pain and fear that it barely sounded like any living thing at all. Min Seok ran toward Vesh. Around him, Dr. Jiwoo was shouting for him to leave, to get to safety, to let the emergency systems handle it. But Min Seok had already calculated the situation. The emergency systems were not working. The building would collapse completely in less than 2 minutes. If Vesh was not moved now, Vesh would die. It was that simple. The metal beam was incredibly heavy. It was designed to support the weight of the entire building, which meant it could support thousands of kilograms of weight. But Min Seok grabbed it anyway. He put his feet in a secure position. He bent his legs. He engaged every muscle in his body. And he lifted. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the beam moved upward, only centimeters, only inches, but it was enough. Vesh crawled out from underneath, moving on pure adrenaline and fear, ignoring the pain in his crushed lower body. Min Seok held the beam. His muscles screamed. His face remained completely calm, showing no strain, no pain, no emotion. His eyes were empty of everything except purpose. He looked like a machine, not a living being. He looked like a force of nature that had taken human form. And then the ceiling came down. The main supports failed. The entire section that Min Seok was standing in collapsed. Metal crushed down from above. Concrete fell like rain. Dust exploded outward in a cloud so thick that visibility dropped to nothing. Dr. Jiwoo, watching from just outside the debris zone, felt her heart stop. She thought she had just watched a man die. She thought she had just watched Captain Park Min Seok get crushed under the weight of a falling building. But then, through the dust, figures emerged. Dr. Jiwoo and another emergency worker rushed in. They found Min Seok partially buried under rubble, but alive. Blood covered his face and body. His left arm hung at an odd angle. His ribs had to be broken. His entire body had to be in terrible pain. But he was still holding Vesh. His right arm was wrapped around the young ethereal's body, protecting him, keeping him safe even in the moment when everything was falling apart. They pulled him out. They got him into the medical bay. The emergency teams worked frantically to save him. And slowly, the facility's emergency systems, the ones that had failed before, came back online. The reactor shut down. The collapse stopped. The danger passed. Of the 11 people in the facility, all 11 had survived. Every single person had made it out. This should have been impossible. The odds of everyone surviving should have been virtually zero, but they had survived because one person, one man made of muscle and scar tissue, and something else that could not quite be named, had decided that every life was worth saving, and then had made that decision into reality through will and sacrifice. Min Seok woke up in a hospital bed 3 days after the collapse. His body was bandaged in so many places that he could barely move. His left arm was in a cast. His ribs were wrapped tight. Tubes ran from his body to machines that beeped and clicked throughout the night. When he opened his eyes, he found a nurse checking his vital signs. She smiled when she saw him awake and left to get a doctor. Over the following days, Min Seok remained in the hospital. He underwent surgeries. He received treatments. Slowly, his body began to heal. The doctors said he was lucky. He had broken 3 ribs, fractured his left arm, suffered severe bruising throughout his body, and received a serious wound on his head. Any one of these injuries could have been worse. All of them together should have killed him. The fact that he was alive at all seemed like a miracle. But Min Seok did not think about miracles. He thought about pain, and he thought about how quickly pain could be forgotten when there was work to be done. The first time the pain became bearable enough that he could think clearly, he asked about Vesh. The doctors told him that the young ethereal had been treated in a separate facility. Vesh's injuries were severe, but Vesh would survive. Vesh would recover. This information was enough for Min Seok. He closed his eyes and slept without dreaming. On the 5th day after the collapse, Ambassador Lyris came to visit him. She walked into the hospital room with the same calm, measured movements she had shown everywhere on Earth. She looked at Min Seok, lying in the hospital bed, covered in bandages and healing wounds. She looked at the machines that kept him alive and measured his heart. She stood beside his bed in silence for a long time. Min Seok did not speak. He simply looked at her, waiting. Finally, the ambassador spoke. Her voice was the same smooth, emotionless tone she always used, but something in that voice had changed. There was a quality to it now that had not been there before. It took Min Seok a moment to recognize it. It was uncertainty. The ethereal, this ancient being from a civilization that had explored the galaxy and understood things that humans could not even imagine, was uncertain about something. "Captain Min Seok," she said slowly, "I need to understand something. I have studied your species for 70 years. I have observed your patterns of behavior. I have concluded that humans are fundamentally violent. This conclusion is based on data and observation. It is not based on emotion or bias. It is scientific fact. And yet, in the collapse of the facility, you did something that does not fit my data. You did something that violates my conclusions about your species. I need you to explain this to me." Min Seok did not answer immediately. He was thinking about how to explain something that he himself did not fully understand. How do you explain an action that comes from instinct rather than thought? How do you explain something that feels absolutely right and absolutely natural, but seems impossible when you try to describe it with words? "What do you want to know?" he finally asked. His voice was weak from days of not speaking. "Why did you do it?" Lyris asked. "You are a soldier. You have been trained in violence. Your entire career has been built on the ability to cause harm and death to other humans, and yet, in that moment in the facility, you chose rescue over survival. You had every reason to leave and save yourself. You had every reason to let others die so that you could live. Every logical calculation would have told you to prioritize your own survival. Why did you not do this?" Min Seok looked at the ceiling. The white tiles were smooth and unmarked and empty of meaning. He thought about the question. He thought about his 17 years as a Marine. He thought about all the moments when he had been trained to choose himself or his unit over everyone else. He thought about all the people he had lost, and he thought about Vesh, whom he barely knew, trapped under metal and dying. "I did not choose anything," he said quietly. "That is what you need to understand, Ambassador. There was no moment where I sat and thought about what the logical choice was. There was no analysis. There was no calculation. I just knew what had to be done. The same way your heart beats without asking permission. The same way you breathe without thinking about it. For humans, for people like me, helping others when they are in danger is something that comes from inside us without our having to think about it." Ambassador Lyris was silent. Min Seok continued. "You see violence in us and you think that means we are broken," he said. "But you do not understand that violence and compassion are not opposites in humans. They are connected. I have violence inside me. I know this. I have killed people. I have made decisions that led to other people's deaths. I carry this with me every day. But I also have this other thing inside me. This thing that makes me run into collapsing buildings to save people I do not know. We are not simple, Ambassador. We contain both things at the same time. We fight because we care about something. We destroy because we love something. We hurt because we are protecting something. You cannot separate the violence from the love. In humans, they are the same thing. The ambassador looked away from Min Seok and looked instead at the window. Outside, the world continued. People walked past the hospital. The sun moved across the sky. Traffic moved through the streets. Ordinary life continued without any awareness that something profound was being discovered in this hospital room. "This is not consistent with my data," Lyra said finally. "No," Min Seok agreed. "It is not. You came to Earth expecting to find only one thing. You expected to find violence and aggression and tribalism. And you found those things because those things do exist in us, but you did not look for the other thing. You did not expect to find a species where violence and love are so deeply connected that they cannot be separated. You did not expect to find people who will die for strangers because saving those strangers feels more important than survival." Ambassador Lyris turned back to look at Min Seok. For the first time, the ethereal's ancient face showed something that might have been emotion. It might have been doubt. It might have been the beginning of something changing, something shifting, a conclusion being questioned for perhaps the first time in centuries. "You are saying that what I have observed as violence is actually protection," she said. "That what I have observed as aggression is actually passion. That what I have labeled as a species flaw is actually a species trait that is both beautiful and terrible at the same time." "Yes," Min Seok said. "We are dangerous, Ambassador. We are dangerous because we care. We will fight for each other. We will kill to protect those we love. We will sacrifice everything for people we do not even know. You came here to judge us and to protect the galaxy from us, but you have not understood what you are protecting against. You are not protecting the galaxy from a species that wants to hurt others. You are protecting the galaxy from a species that will do anything, absolutely anything, for anyone who needs help. And maybe that is not something to be afraid of. Maybe that is something the galaxy has been needing all along." The ambassador stood in silence for a long time. Then she turned and left without speaking another word. Min Seok watched her go. He did not know if what he had said would change anything. He did not know if the ethereals would listen. He only knew that he had told the truth about his species. And now what happened next was beyond his control. He closed his eyes and let the machines keep him alive. The future would come whether he was ready for it or not. After her visit to Min Seok, Ambassador Lyris requested something that surprised everyone. She asked for more time. She asked to extend the delegation's stay on Earth. She explained to the United Nations that the initial research was incomplete. The ethereals needed to continue their investigation before reaching a final conclusion. They would need to interview more people. They would need to observe human behavior more carefully. They would need to understand something that their previous observations had missed. Dr. Kang Ji-woo did not know what had changed, but she could see that something had shifted in the ethereal's attitude. They were no longer dismissive during meetings. They were no longer already certain of everything. They began asking real questions, questions that seemed to come from genuine curiosity rather than the desire to confirm what they already believed. The extended delegation began to travel across Earth. They visited cities and villages. They visited hospitals and schools. They visited military bases and scientific research centers. They interviewed soldiers and doctors, teachers and parents, artists and workers. Slowly, carefully, they began to build a new picture of humanity, one that was much more complex than what they had seen before. One afternoon, a young woman named Han Na-ri was interviewed by one of the ethereal researchers. Han Na-ri was a social worker in Seoul, South Korea. She spent her days helping families who were struggling, people who had lost their homes or their jobs or their direction in life. She was not famous. She did not make a lot of money. She simply spent her days doing work that was not glamorous or celebrated, but was desperately needed. The ethereal asked her about her family. Nari explained that her grandfather had been a soldier during a war many decades before. He had seen combat. He had killed enemy soldiers. He had watched people he loved die. He had come home with psychological wounds that never fully healed. For many years, he had been angry and broken and unable to connect with other people properly. But then, Nari said, something had changed. Her grandfather had begun to volunteer at a hospital. He had spent 50 years helping sick people and dying people. He had spent 50 years bringing comfort to those who were in pain. He had lived twice as long in peace and service as he had lived in war, and the peace had slowly transformed him. The violence in his past did not disappear, but it had been balanced by decades of compassion. When Nari told this story, something shifted in the ethereal's understanding. The researcher looked at this young woman who had inherited her grandfather's capacity for both violence and service, and the researcher began to understand that this was not a contradiction in humans. This was integration. Humans could contain both the capacity for violence and the capacity for infinite compassion. They could live with both things inside them at the same time. The ethereals continued their investigations. They spoke with soldiers who had killed and then spent years trying to build peace. They spoke with scientists who created destructive weapons and then spent their careers trying to make sure those weapons would never be used. They spoke with ordinary people who had lived through violence and trauma and had chosen to help others rather than repeat the cycle. And slowly, the ethereals began to see a pattern that they had not seen before. Humans did not choose between violence and compassion. Humans chose both. They accepted both aspects of themselves and tried to live with them in balance. This was not weakness. This was not a character flaw. This was something unique, something that the ethereals had never seen before in any species they had encountered. Captain Min Seok was eventually released from the hospital. He walked with some difficulty because of his injuries, but he could walk. He could move. He could function. The doctors said he would recover completely, though it would take time. When he was released, Dr. Jiwoo came to pick him up. They drove together in silence for a while. Then Jiwoo spoke. "The ethereals have been studying humans," she said. "Really studying us, I mean, not judging us, actually trying to understand us. And I think something has changed their minds. I think something has made them question their original conclusions." Min Seok did not respond for a long time. Then he asked a simple question. "Did you ask them what changed their minds?" "They said they wanted to understand what you meant," Jiwoo replied. "When you told the ambassador about how violence and compassion are connected in humans. They said they had never considered that humans might not be flawed for containing both things. They said they had assumed that having both violence and compassion would make a species unstable. But now they wonder if perhaps it makes humans something special." When Min Seok returned to the military base, he found that he was not alone. The ethereals had requested to observe military life. They wanted to see how soldiers were trained and what motivated them. They did not want to see the destruction and death of warfare. They wanted to understand the discipline and structure and the bonds that kept soldiers connected to each other. Min Seok found himself being interviewed by young ethereals who had genuine questions. They asked him why he had chosen to be a soldier. They asked him what he felt when he thought about the people he had lost. They asked him why he would run into danger to save others when he could have saved himself. To all of these questions, Min Seok gave honest answers. He did not hide the darkness in his own heart. He did not pretend to be better than he was. He simply told the truth about who he was and why he did what he did. One of the ethereals, the young scientist named Vesh, whose life Min Seok had saved, came to see him. Vesh moved slowly because of injuries that still were healing, but Vesh came nonetheless. The ethereal and the human looked at each other in a moment of quiet understanding. "My people were wrong about yours," Vesh said. This statement had the weight of centuries of ethereal certainty being overturned. We saw violence and concluded that violence was all you were capable of. We did not see that your violence comes from the same place as your compassion. We did not understand that a species capable of such harm is also capable of such help. We judged you too quickly and too harshly. You were trying to protect your galaxy, Minseok said. It was not wrong to be careful. No, Vesh agreed. But it was wrong to judge without truly understanding. And now we do understand, and it changes everything. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere around the ethereal delegation changed completely. They were no longer observers judging a primitive species. They had become students, trying to learn from a species that had discovered something profound about what it meant to be alive. They had discovered humanity in all its contradictions and complexity. The delegation's time on Earth grew shorter. The day came when they would need to return home to report their findings to the Ethereal Council. But before they left, the Ethereals requested one final meeting with the human team.